Aren't they recruiting? Aren't these self-interested?
They're recruiting for the. They're recruiting for the CIA.
Using the CIA.
They're recruiting for the CIA. They're not recruiting for.
Common mindset.
They're recruiting for the CIA. They're not recruiting for Microsoft or Wall Street. This concentration on CIA atrocities is one of the techniques that's used to avoid criticism of the government of a real power. If you can blame something on the CIA, this kind of rogue outfit, then you do exactly what the government wants you to do. The CIA is there for what's called plausible deniability. It's the phrase that's used inside. So if the government wants to, say, overthrow the Indonesian, if Washington wants to overthrow the government of Indonesia, you say, okay, the CIA did it. And then you can say, well, we don't have anything to do with it. That's just that rogue outfit if something goes wrong. The CIA is an agency of the executive branch of the government. They do what the executive branch of the government tells them to do. There's a long record, rich record, and there are some exceptions, but overwhelmingly the CIA is just an agency of the executive which acts in ways to provide plausible deniability, to sort of keep us clean if something goes wrong. Then you blame them if something goes wrong. And that's true on case after case. So, yeah, when you talk about the CIA, you should think of that as a metaphor. It's a way of describing what the executive branch of the government is doing and the corporate backers of the executive branch, and they've got this agency which carries out the ugly stuff for them. And that's what secret agencies are like in most states. So I think one should be cautious about that. I mean, it's not wrong to blame the CIA for this, that, and the other thing, but remember, they're the hand that's not the brain.
We questioned President Obama's sincerity and veracity in saying he'll be working day and night for peace between Palestinians and Israelis.
Well, yeah, he probably said it somewhere, but that's like one of these statements, like Hitler's statement that we invaded Poland to protect ourselves from the wild terror of the Poles. I mean, these are perfectly predictable statements by every leader. I'm going to be working for peace and justice and trust in me and so on. So those are the kind of statements you ignore because they're meaningless. They're predictable. Every powerful leader will say the same thing, and they do. So you ignore it and pay attention to what he actually said. Well, it turns out that comes down to practically nothing. His campaign was very well designed so that it would be vacuous. His managers ran an extremely good campaign. It was so good that the advertising industry, which gives an award every year for the best marketing campaign of the year, they gave it to the Obama campaign last year. And high executives quoted in the business press were saying, really exultant. They were saying, we've been marketing candidates like commodities ever since Reagan, and this is the best we've ever done. It's going to change the atmosphere in corporate boardrooms, new ways of doing things and so on. And it sells in Europe too. If you watch the exultant campaign, well, if you read the New York Times, for example, a couple of days ago, it was a front page picture of the different dresses that Michelle Obama wore. In the morning she wore a dress from this fancy designer, and the afternoon it was some other fancy designer, and all the young people loved it, and they wanted to touch Obama and so on. Yeah, that's good marketing campaigns. But and it was the same right through the campaign. If you've paid attention, so you know. It was basically vacuous. I mean, like on Israel-Palestine, literally the only statement he made was the one I quoted on Sderot, other than, the usual vacuous platitudes. I'll talk tomorrow about Obama in the Middle East, so I won't go into it now, but put it simply, he's probably more hawkish than Bush. If I understand, what's the current situation of the Norman Finkelstein case?
Yeah, does he have anything upcoming work? And also maybe briefly describe the situation?
Well, the situation is that he's written extensive and outstanding work on Israel-Palestine, international law, other things. And he was coming up for tenure at DePaul University. and there was a huge attack on him, made kind of like a jihad to try to destroy him. And he came pretty close to being appointed, despite it. But at the last minute, for whatever reason, the administration overturned the faculty, the faculty recommendation to promote him to tenure. Okay, now that is an attack on academic freedom, of course, but it's a very special case. The special case has to do with a lunatic at Harvard Law School named Alan Dershowitz, who makes old-fashioned Stalinism look pale, literally. I won't go through it. But Finkelstein made the mistake of writing a book. He's a very meticulous, careful scholar, and nobody can ever find anything wrong with what he says. But he wrote a book in which he ran through Dershowitz's best-selling apologetics for Israel and showed that it was just a tissue of lies and fabrications and slanders and support for atrocities and so on. And it was a very careful, meticulous job. Now, Dershowitz is a lawyer. He actually wrote a book called something like Advice to Young Lawyers, and he gives some good advice. He says if you have a client and you know that he's guilty as sin, what you should do is anything you can up to outright violation of law to get him clear him. Okay, now Dershowitz has two clients, himself and Israel. Okay, and he acts on his own advice. So that he knows he can't respond to what Finkelstein wrote. So therefore he launched into a campaign of vilification and slander of a kind I've never seen. I don't even think you could find it in the Stalinist literature. I mean, just to give you an example, Norman's mother, who he reveres, is a survivor of Auschwitz. Okay? So Finkelstein actually published an article in which he says she survived Auschwitz because she was a capo, a collaborator with the Nazis. This is, see if you can find anything like that in the Stalinist literature or anywhere. That's the kind of thing that was going on. And he probably managed to mobilize funders and others, and of course the most vulgar parts of the Jewish community got involved. And the Catholic university is vulnerable because they can be accused of anti-Semitism.